In 1944, the most trusted humanitarian organization on earth visited a Nazi concentration camp and told the world everything was fine. That organization was the Red Cross. The Red Cross on a white background. You've seen it on ambulances, hospitals, disaster relief trucks. To most people, it means one thing. Help is coming. Safety. Humanity in its purest form. But behind that symbol is a story they have never put in the brochure. A story of a man who lied to build his legend. Of an institution that looked at the Holocaust and chose silence. And of travel documents stamped with that famous Red Cross that helped the worst war criminals in history disappear forever. This is the origin of the Red Cross, and it is nothing like what you were taught. June 1859. Northern Italy. A battle has just ended near a small town called Solferino. 40,000 men lie dead or dying across the fields. French, Austrian, Italian. No ambulances, no organized medical care. Just screaming, bleeding soldiers left in the summer heat, with no one coming to help them. Into this scene walks a 31-year-old Swiss businessman named Henry Dunant. He is not a soldier. He is not a doctor. He is not even supposed to be here. He is on his way to meet Napoleon III, to beg for water rights for his failing mill in colonial Algeria. What Dunant sees at Solferino breaks him. He organizes local women to tend the wounded. He tears up shirts to make bandages. He stays for days, watching men die from wounds that could have been treated if anyone had been prepared. He goes home. He writes a book, A Memory of Solferino, describing what he saw. And he proposes something radical. Every nation should have a trained, neutral volunteer relief organization ready before the next war begins. Protected by international law, marked by a single symbol, a red cross on a white field. In 1863, the International Committee of the Red Cross is founded in Geneva. In 1864, 16 nations signed the first Geneva Convention. It is one of the most important moments in the history of human civilization. And Henry Dunant is celebrated as a hero, a saint, almost. But here is what they left out. Dunant was not simply passing through Solferino on his way to a noble cause. He was there because his business in Algeria was collapsing. He had convinced wealthy Genevant investors to pour money into a land deal in French colonial. North Africa land he did not fully own the rights to. Worked by local Algerians under brutal conditions he benefited from directly. The meeting with Napoleon III he was rushing toward. It was to beg the emperor to override French colonial law so Dunant could keep operating. The Red Cross was not born purely from a man moved by human suffering. It was born in the middle of a business trip gone wrong. By a man who was, at that very moment, entangled in a colonial enterprise built on exploitation. And within 10 years, it would get far worse. In 1867, Dunant's financial empire collapsed entirely. One of the banks he was connected to went bankrupt. He was condemned by a Geneva court for deceptive business practices. The very city that had celebrated him cast him out. The ICRC, the organization he founded, forced him to resign. They erased his name from their official history for the next 3 decades. Henry Dunant spent years homeless, living in charity shelters, sleeping in fields. The founder of the Red Cross, penniless and forgotten, wandering Europe. He eventually received the first Nobel Peace Prize in 1901. But by then, the institution he had created had already begun making choices he never could have imagined, and never was alive long enough to answer for. In 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. Within months, the first Nazi concentration camps open. Dachau, Oranienburg, Esterwigen, Jews. Political prisoners, trade unionists, rounded up and imprisoned. Almost immediately, humanitarian organizations around the world began receiving pleas, letters, testimonies, survivors describing what was happening inside those camps. The ICRC received them too. They did nothing. An ICRC official named Karl Burkhardt, one of the most powerful men in the organization, wrote internally that it was, quote, dangerous to occupy oneself with what was happening in the concentration camps. He was certain any visit would simply be used by the Nazis for propaganda. And so they stayed away. They deferred. They waited. Meanwhile, the German Red Cross, which was technically a member organization of the ICRC, had been, as historians now put it, deeply Nazified. Its leadership was loyal to Hitler, and when the ICRC asked them for assurances about the camps, the German Red Cross replied that, quote, the living standards in the camps were higher than most of the inmates were generally used to. The ICRC accepted this, officially. Then came 1942, and everything changed, except the ICRC's response. By the summer of 1942, senior ICRC officials knew the truth. Not rumors, not whispers. The truth. An American consul named Paul Squire met with Karl Burkhardt in November 1942. He asked Burkhardt directly what was happening to the Jews of Europe. Burkhardt confirmed it. He confirmed that Hitler had issued an order to make all of Europe Judenfrei, free of Jews.
Die Völker werden in kurzer Zeit erkennen, dass das nationalsozialistische Deutschland keine Feindschaft mit anderen Völkern will. Ich will heute wieder ein Prophet sein. Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
And he told the consul that since there was nowhere to send them, this could only mean one thing. The ICRC knew that millions of people were being systematically murdered. And in October 1942, the organization's leadership held a vote. Should the ICRC publicly condemn what was happening? Should they use the full weight of their moral authority, their global reputation, their access to world leaders to force the Nazis to stop? The vote was taken, the motion was defeated. But this was not simply a democratic vote. One man blocked the appeal. Philipp Etter, president of the Swiss Confederation, the most powerful politician in Switzerland, sat on the ICRC committee that day. He was opposed, he imposed his view, and the committee fell silent. They passed an internal resolution to stay silent. Not publicly. The world would not learn about this resolution until the 1980s, when historians finally accessed the sealed archives. The ICRC would later say they stayed silent because they feared speaking out would cost them access to prisoner of war camps, where they were doing legitimate work helping soldiers on both sides. That if they went public, the Nazis would expel them entirely, and more people would die. It is an argument. Historians debate it to this day. But here is what is not debatable. While that debate was happening internally, The ICRC was doing almost nothing for the Jews in the death camps, not even sending food parcels, not even writing letters. While they maintained access to POW camps for soldiers, they classified Jewish civilians in concentration camps as an internal German matter outside their authority. 6 million people, and the organization built to protect the most vulnerable, had decided they were not its problem. In June 1944, by which point the Holocaust was already being reported on the front pages of the New York Times, the ICRC finally agreed to visit a Nazi camp, just one, and the Nazis chose it for them. Theresienstadt, or as the Nazis called it, the model ghetto. What the ICRC delegation did not know, or chose not to investigate, was that the Nazis had spent months preparing for their arrival. Jews were forced to paint buildings, fake shops and cafes were erected. Children were rehearsed to play and sing. Flowers were planted along the streets that Red Cross delegates would walk down. The ICRC delegation arrived. They were given a guided tour. They saw the cafe, the children, the clean streets. They did not ask to go anywhere unescorted. They did not demand access to areas the Nazis hadn't prepared. Their own report noted, and this is real, that the guides tried to limit as much as possible insight into how the camp really functioned. And yet, their official report described the camp in positive terms. An ICRC delegate named Maurice Rossel filed a report that did not raise alarm. 35 years later, in 1979, he was interviewed on camera and said he stood by his original assessment. He said he had confirmed the conditions were acceptable and would probably say so again. The ICRC had not just been deceived, it had allowed itself to be deceived. And then it put its stamp of legitimacy on the deception. The Nazis used the visit as propaganda around the world. Even the Red Cross says the Jews are fine. Later that same year, Auschwitz was operating at the peak of its killing capacity. 4,000 people murdered every single day. The ICRC never visited Auschwitz, not once. May 1945. Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. The Nuremberg trials begin. The world demands justice, and the men responsible for the Holocaust, the engineers of murder, begin to run. They needed new identities, new papers, a way to disappear. And here, in the darkest chapter of this entire story, the Red Cross appears again. After the war, the ICRC set up an emergency travel document system to help displaced persons move across a shattered Europe. Refugees, survivors, people whose documents had been destroyed in the chaos of war. It was a legitimate and genuinely needed program, but the system had almost no screening process. Between 1945 and 1950, the ICRC issued approximately 120,000 travel documents. Alongside those, it issued around 25,000 new identity documents. And into that system, with the help of Vatican officials and sympathetic priests who vouched for false identities, walked some of the most wanted men in history. Adolf, Eichmann. The man who coordinated the logistics of sending millions of Jews to the death camps. He obtained a Red Cross travel document under the name Ricardo Clement. In 1950, he arrived in Argentina. Josef Mengele, the doctor at Auschwitz, who performed experiments on living human beings, on twins, on children, on pregnant women, without anesthetic, simply to satisfy his scientific curiosity. He obtained a Red Cross travel document under the name Helmut Gregor. The CIA later confirmed this from their own files. These men and thousands of others escaped justice, holding documents stamped with the symbol of human compassion. The Red Cross, when confronted with this history, has consistently said the travel documents were misused, that the organization was deceived, not complicit. Historians disagree about the degree of institutional knowledge, but the facts themselves are not disputed. The documents existed, the Nazis used them, and the ICRC's complete lack of verification procedures made it possible. Eichmann was eventually captured by Israeli Mossad agents in Buenos Aires in 1960. He was tried in Jerusalem and executed in 1962, the only person ever executed under Israeli civil law. Mengele was never caught. He died in Brazil in 1979, having lived freely for 34 years, while the families of his victims never saw justice. In 1944, the same year the Red Cross visited Theresienstadt and filed a positive report, the ICRC was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its work during the war. It was the organization's second Nobel Prize. The Nobel Committee, in making the award, had no idea that the ICRC had voted in 1942 to stay silent about the Holocaust. That information was buried in sealed archives and would not emerge for another 40 years. When it finally did emerge in the 1980s, the ICRC acknowledged it. In 1995, the organization's president attended the commemoration of Auschwitz's liberation and publicly expressed regret. In 2015, the ICRC's president stated directly that the organization had failed to protect civilians and, most notably, Jews persecuted and murdered by the Nazi regime. These are not my words. These are the words of the Red Cross itself. Today, the Red Cross does genuine, important work in conflict zones around the world. That is real. That is not in question. But the symbol on that white flag did not arrive spotless. It was carried into the modern world by a man fleeing his own bankruptcy, stamped onto travel documents that helped murderers escape, and held above an organization that voted in writing to look away from the greatest crime of the 20th century. The Red Cross on a white background means help is coming. It always should have. If this story made you think differently about something you trusted, that's what history is for. Like and subscribe if you want more stories they didn't teach you in school. And leave a comment below. Do you think the ICRC's silence was a calculated decision, or a catastrophic failure of courage? We'll see you next time at History Closet.